Right now, whenever you go to start it up and whenever you're coming down at a low speed, maybe around 2 or 3 miles an hour, it's got a pretty bad shake. But what I believe is the problem is the motor mounts. So here's the top motor mount, and of course this is on like the accessory side of the motor. But we can look at this and we can definitely tell that it's not good. There is a piece of rubber here, and of course that is what holds up the motor. This should be relatively close to the top of this, but as you all can see, it's hanging down probably about a whole inch. What we're going to do is we're going to replace this. There's one here, there's one underneath the battery for your transmission, so we'll be removing that. There is one on the opposite side. You actually have to remove the tire and inner fender well on actually both sides in order to get to the other ones. I know that the one that's on the bottom side of this guy, subframe has to drop out in order for you to get that bottom transmission mount. So we will be going over that. So with no further ado, we're gonna take you guys on a little test drive just to show you what the shake is like. What I've done is I've actually put a water bottle over here to show you guys just how kind of bad it shakes on top of the dash. Go ahead and fire it up. So you can actually see it is actually moving that water bottle just a little bit. What I'm going to do next, in order to gain access to certain parts of the motor here, what we're going to do is we're going to take off the tires, both sides, get some jack stands underneath it, and I'm lucky enough to where I actually have a neighbor that has an engine hoist, and what we're going to be doing is hooking some chain over here and taking the tension off of those motor mounts. I have seen other people just kind of take a lift and put a piece of wood or jacking it up underneath the oil pan. You can do that, but if I have the tools to do it the right way, then I'm going to. Actually get this top motor mount loose first, and then we'll go to do the bottom, because I know that you actually have to lift the motor up to a certain degree in order to squeeze out that little dog bone mount right there. And I would imagine you probably have to do the same thing for the other side. Using an 8mm socket, go ahead and disconnect our negative battery terminal. Alright, so jacking up the car. So one thing that's pretty important, whenever you do go to jack the car up, I've seen a lot of times where these get bent. This is actually where the body panels have come together as far as a weld. You do not want to jack your car up on that. You want to find the frame, which is it's maybe about 4 to 5 inches wide, but that's going to give you the most sturdy support. So the lug nuts be a 19mm. So now that we've got the wheel removed, we're going to take off this plastic liner. It looks like there's a little push pin down here. Alright, so the only thing that was holding that in was just this little push pin right down here. Slid up into this, slid on into this, and then it just kind of went straight up into there. But I can already tell by looking at this motor mount, the gap on this side is a lot bigger than this, almost as if it's turned this way inside. So that's definitely not what you want to see. I guarantee you that the bushings wore out, getting a lot of vibration from that. We're going to be using an engine hoist. You've got a hook here, you have a hook here. If it was my choice, I would be using a chain. Ratchet strap is all that I could find. However, we're not taking this motor all the way out, we are just relieving the stress on it, so I think it's going to be more than okay. So, in order to take the stress off of the dog bone mount at the bottom, we actually have to undo this one. Now that we've got our engine hoist, we know that our engine isn't going to fall. We can go ahead and take these nuts off on either side. Alright, so in order to get this motor mount loose, it's going to be two 15mm nuts. Now one thing I do want to point out is obviously we're taking the stress off this one in order to get to that bottom one, but until we get that bottom one changed out, we're going to want to keep this one loose. Well, this one's being pretty stubborn, so we're going to hit it with the impact. Come right out. So one thing I do want to point out is that one is longer than the other. The shorter one goes up front. Alright, let's see if we can't lift up on the motor some more. And you can definitely tell Alright, we'll go back up, lower the engine hoist just a little bit. WD-40 always helps. Okay, so from everything that I have read, these two bolts will get torqued down to 52 foot-pounds. Alright, so the bolts up here are going to be a 15 mil. You all can definitely see that this one is definitely wore out. Should not be able to get my fingers under that. Alright, so it's going to be a 7 mil.
Where's boxes?
For this to actually slide over the studs, what we'll need to do is lower back down the motor a little bit. Now I've got it to where it is flush against both. Go ahead and tighten these down. So what we'll do is we'll get all these kind of snug, and then we'll come back and torque them. From what I have read, these are supposed to be 37 foot-pounds. So earlier we did have our battery disconnected. What we're going to do in order to get to this bottom mount is I'm going to try just moving this kind of up and out of the way, and we'll go ahead and take the battery out. So in order to move this, there's 3 bolts down there at the bottom. Unfortunately, I do not know what they are because the previous owner has gotten rid of them. But I'd imagine that it's probably like a 13 mil. Absolutely shot. So on this bolt, the bolt towards the back of the car is actually a 13 millimeter, unlike the front, which was a 15. And this one's just an average size bolt. But that should come right out. So we each got one finger tight. So I have heard and researched and found out that there are kind of 2 different opinions on what you're actually supposed to torque these bolts down to. I've read somewhere that it's 37. I've read somewhere where it's 52. We're going to play it safe and just go with 52. Alright, so in order to take out your battery tray, looking like there's 2 13 millimeter bolts at the bottom of the tray. Could be more, but that's all I can see as of right now. So we have this bolt and this bolt, and then if you come around to the bottom of the car, this guy right here, 13 millimeter, pretty long bolt. Okay, so here's our transmission mount. Kind of hard to see with the camera, just hard to squeeze in there really. There's one, but there's one on the opposite side as well. Coming off the bottom of the transmission mount, you want to get the bolt that is inside of that loose first before you go dropping the subframe. This bottom nut is a 15 millimeter socket. Crawl up underneath the vehicle, and there's a subframe bolt. And as you come up to the front, you gotta get that guy right there. So the one back here is actually an 18 mil, and I'd say that the one up front is also an 18 mil. So what we're going to do next is drop this subframe, 2 18mm bolts. Alright, so these 2 bolts are a 10mm socket. Kind of push up on that stud. There we go. Alright. So y'all can see definitely some rust there. That's what was holding me back. This one wasn't necessarily bad, but I had it explained to me that if you have one mount bad, the other 3 or however many you have on your motor are picking up the rest of that stress. So essentially they went from having 25% to 33%. You know they're going to wear out a little bit faster. So if I knew I had one bad, I'd go ahead and change them all out. So what we'll do is we will go back up and lower our engine hoist back down to where that lines up. We'll probably end up lowering it just a hair more, but I wanted to make sure that we got it tightened to the motor, or in this case the transmission, before we got it tightened to the subframe. Alright, so a little bit of a struggle to get this mount on and get the subframe, transmission, and this mount to line up. So what we're going to try doing is getting the back side in here first. So now that we have those tight, we're going to go ahead and tighten back up our subframe here, and then that way we can go ahead and tighten the nut that was on that stud on the bottom of that mount. Alright, so for the torque specs on those subframe bolts, from the research that I have found, it is 151 foot-pounds. Okay, so what we're going to do next is go ahead and get the bottom nut back up on this. But first, what we're going to have to do is go ahead and lower our engine back down to where all the weight is back on that motor mount. As far as the nut to the bottom side here, and the nuts there on the side, from what I can tell, everything is 52 foot-pounds. So that's what we'll end up torquing it down to. That right there concludes the complete installation of all 4 motor mounts on a Saturn S-series. Of course, this would apply to the S-series and the S-series. So although when we went to go remove this, we did do that bottom bolt first, what I'm going to go ahead and do is actually line these up, and that way you're not shooting blind when you go back up underneath the car. You're able to actually put some pressure on this. So going to get those finger tight and then go back down and get the one that went in through the side. Alright, so we got that side bolt tight, and we're going to just go ahead and get these tight one more time. Not too worried about the torque specs on those. So whenever you're reinstalling this air filter, do not forget to plug back in your air intake temperature sensor. So got our push pan back in, inner fender well is back on, and when you go to put back on your tire, torque your lug nuts to 103 foot-pounds. Do it, of course, in the star pattern. Alright, let's take this thing for a little test spin, see how well it rides now. Alright, so we are now back in the Saturn after changing all 4 mounts. And here's our bottle of water. And we're going to go ahead and start the car and see how much our dash shakes now. Golly, not even like the same car. You can tell that that water is just barely moving. Alright, so we're just going around the neighborhood here. Huge difference. A little bit hard to tell just how much of a difference it really made, just given the fact that you guys aren't sitting in the vehicle. But you'll have to just take my word for it, and hopefully that water bottle is somewhat of an indicator. I mean, it just sits almost darn near still. So hopefully you guys learned something from this video. Like I said, I got many more videos to come. I'm gonna try to stick to the GM side of things and mostly tailgates. However, I just wanted to reach out and do this video because it only seemed like there were videos on how to change one mount or this mount or that mount, but not all 4 done correctly. So please like and subscribe. There'll be many more to come. Thank you guys.